In the bustling city of Lagos, where towering office buildings stood alongside busy markets, lived Dr. Jidenna Andrew. At just 35 years old, he was already one of the most respected surgeons in Nigeria. His skilled hands had saved countless lives, and his brilliant mind had brought several innovative surgical techniques. Jidenna, as he was known to his friends, had grown up in a wealthy neighborhood. His parents, both successful oil executives, had spared no expense in his upbringing. From the best private schools to holidays in Dubai and London, Jidenna had experienced it all. Yet, despite his privileged background, he remained humble and compassionate. His luxurious apartment in a high-rise building offered a stunning view. But Jidenna often felt lonely. He yearned for something more, something that his money couldn't buy: true love and companionship. In a modest small house, lived the Kuti family. Mr. Kuti, a hard-working civil servant, had remarried after losing his first wife to cancer. His new wife, Tiwa, had brought her 2 daughters and a son into the family. Precious, Mr. Kuti's daughter from his first marriage, completed the household. Precious was a beautiful young woman of 22, with smooth skin, expressive brown eyes, and a warm smile that could light up a room. Despite the hardships she faced at home, she always maintained a positive attitude. Precious' life was far from easy, especially when her father was away for work. Mr. Kuti's job often took him to different states in the country for extended periods. He would leave at the beginning of each month and return at the end, his pockets full of hard-earned money to support his family. During these times, Precious' life became unbearable. Tiwa, her stepmother, showed her true colors the moment Mr. Kuti's car disappeared down the street. Her fake smile would disappear as she barked orders at Precious. "Precious, get to work. This compound won't sweep itself," Tiwa would shout, her voice echoing through the small compound. Precious would spend her days cooking, cleaning, and catering to her stepmother's every demand. Her stepsisters, Toby and Lola, were no better. They treated Precious like a personal maid, demanding she wash their clothes, tidy their room, and even complete their assignments. "Precious, I need my dress ironed for tonight's party," Toby would demand, throwing the colorful fabric at Precious without even a glance. "And don't forget to finish my economics project," Lola would add, shouting as she goes out of the room. The only ray of sunshine in Precious's life at home was her stepbrother. Unlike his mother and sisters, Tommy saw the wickedness in their treatment of Precious and did his best to help her when he could. "Here, let me help you with those dishes," Tommy would offer, rolling up his sleeves and standing beside Precious at the sink. "Thanks, Tommy," Precious would reply, grateful for the assistance and the companionship. To contribute to the family's income, Precious had started selling fruits at a small stand near the local park. Every morning, she would wake up before dawn, prepare a quick breakfast for the family, and then head to the market to buy fresh fruits. By 7 a.m., her colorful stand would be set up, displaying fresh mangoes, oranges, bananas, and pineapples. Despite the long hours and hard work, Precious found joy in her little fruit stand. She loved chatting with her regular customers, recommending the sweetest fruits, and seeing the smiles on children's faces as they bit into juicy mangoes or sweet pineapples. One sunny morning, as Precious was arranging a new batch of ripe mangoes, a sleek white Mercedes-Benz pulled up near her stand. The door opened, and out stepped a tall, handsome man dressed en suit. It was none other than Dr. Jidenna Andrew. Jidenna had decided to take a different route to the hospital that day, wanting to avoid the usual traffic. As he was driving through, the colorful fruit stand caught his eye, and he decided to stop. As he approached the stand, he was struck by the beautiful young woman tending to it. Her skin glowed in the morning sunlight, and her eyes sparkled as she greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. How may I help you today?" Precious asked, her voice as sweet as the fruits she sold. Jidenna found himself speechless, captivated by her beauty and the warmth of her smile. He quickly regained his composure and replied, "Good morning. Those mangoes look delicious. Could I have a couple, please?" "Of course," Precious replied, carefully selecting the best mangoes from her display. As she handed them to Jidenna, their fingers brushed, they both glanced at each quickly. "That'll be 1,000 Nigerian nairas please," Precious said, trying to hide the blush on her cheeks. Jidenna checked his pocket for his wallet, pulled out 5,000 Nigerian nairas, and handed it to Precious. "Keep the change," he said with a smile. "Ah, Oga, it's too much." Precious started to protest, but Jidena cut her off gently. Please, I insist. These look like the best mangoes I've ever seen. They're worth every kobo. Precious' blush deepened as she accepted the money. Thank you, sir. That's very kind of you. Jidena, he said, extending his hand. My name is Jidena. I'm Precious, she replied, shaking his hand. The touch stayed for a moment longer than necessary, neither wanting to let go. It's a pleasure to meet you, Precious, Jidena said, his eyes never leaving hers. I have a feeling I'll be stopping by for fruit more often. As Jidena walked back to his car, taking a bite of the sweet mango, he couldn't shake the image of Precious's smile from his mind. From her part, Precious watched him drive away, her heart beating in a way it never had before. As the sun climbed higher in the Lego sky, Precious turned back to her fruit stand, a new spring in her step and a sparkle in her eye. But the day was young and back at home, Tiwa and her daughters were waking up, ready to make Precious's life difficult once again. Precious, being her normal routine, had to wake up so early to do all the house chores so she can get to the market early enough to get the best fruits for her stand. Dr. Jidena found himself always using that same route, so he can always see Precious in the morning before going to work. Over the next few weeks, Jidena and Precious's friendship grew. They talked about their lives, dreams, and families. Precious felt herself falling for the kind doctor, but she kept her feelings hidden. One day, as Precious walked home from her fruit stand, she saw Jidena's car parked outside her house. Her heart raced with excitement and worry. Inside, she found Jidena talking to her father and stepmother. It turned out that Mr. Kuti had fallen ill at work, and Jidena had treated him at the hospital. Ah, Precious, her father called out. Come meet the wonderful doctor who helped me today. Tiwa, Precious's stepmother, was all smiles. Yes, come in, my dear, she said sweetly, putting an arm around Precious. Isn't it wonderful that Dr. Jidena was there to help your father? Precious was shocked by Tiwa's sudden kindness. She knew it was all an act for Jidena's and her father. Jidena smiled at Precious. It's nice to see you again, Precious. I didn't realize this was your family. Tiwa's eyes widened. Oh, you two know each other. Before Precious could speak, Tiwa jumped in. Dr. Jidena, you must join us for dinner sometime. I'm sure my daughter Toby would love to meet you. She's studying to be a nurse, you know. Jidena politely agreed, but his eyes kept drifting to Precious. Over the next few weeks, Tiwa invited Jidena to dinner several times. Each time, she made sure Toby was dressed up and seated next to the doctor. She kept Precious busy in the kitchen, only allowing her to serve the food. Precious, dear, Tiwa would say in a sweet voice when Mr. Kuti was around, why don't you bring out the dessert? You made it with so much love. But as soon as Mr. Kuti left the room, Tiwa would hiss, don't you dare try to catch the doctor's eye. He's too good for you. Toby is the perfect match for him. Precious's heart ached, but she said nothing. She didn't want to cause trouble for her father. One evening, as Precious was washing dishes after another dinner with Jidena, he came into the kitchen. Precious, he said softly, can we talk outside for a moment? Tiwa, who was nearby, overheard. She quickly sent Toby to the kitchen. Toby, darling, why don't you help Precious with the dishes? Dr. Jidena, come join me in the living room. I want to show you Toby's nursing awards. Jidena politely declined. Thank you, but I really need to speak with Precious about something important. Tiwa was angry, but she couldn't object without seeming rude. Outside, in the compound, Jidena took Precious's hands in his. Precious, I've been trying to tell you for weeks. I'm in love with you. Not Toby, not anyone else. You. Tears filled Precious' eyes. I love you too, Jidena. But my stepmother. Don't worry about her, Jidena said firmly. We'll face whatever comes together. As they hugged, they didn't notice Tiwa watching from the window, her face twisted with anger. The next day, when Mr. Kuti left for work, Tiwa confronted Precious. You ungrateful girl. How dare you try to steal Jidena from Toby? I'll make sure you never see him again. But this time, Precious stood her ground. No, Mama Tiwa. Jidena loves me, and I love him. I won't let you ruin this for me. Tiwa raised her hand to slap Precious, but a voice stopped her. That's enough. It was Tommy, Precious's stepbrother. "I've been seeing how you treat Precious and it's far from fair." Tommy always tried to defend Precious, and this made their bond as step-siblings grow stronger. One sunny afternoon, Jidenna decided it was time for Precious to meet his family. He picked her up. They drove to his parents' big house in a fancy part of Lagos. Precious felt nervous. She wore her best dress, but it still looked simple compared to the grand house they were approaching. As they walked in, Jidenna's mother, Mrs. Andrew, looked at Precious with surprise. She had expected someone different. "Jidenna, dear," Mrs. Andrew said, "who is this young lady?" "This is Precious, the woman I love," Jidenna said proudly. Mr. Andrew, Jidenna's father, frowned. "Son, we thought you were dating that politician's daughter." Precious felt uncomfortable. She could tell they didn't approve of her. During dinner, Mrs. Andrew asked Precious many questions about her family and job. When Precious said she sold fruits, Mrs. Andrew almost dropped her fork. "A fruit seller," she exclaimed. "Jidenna, you can't be serious." Jidenna defended Precious. "Mother, Precious is kind, hardworking, and intelligent. I love her for who she is." Mr. Andrew shook his head. "Son, think about your future. You need someone from our social circle." On the drive home, Precious was quiet. Jidenna took her hand. "I'm sorry about my parents," he said. "They'll come around eventually." Precious smiled at him. "It's okay. I understand it's not easy for them." Jidenna realized how lucky he was to have found someone so understanding. He loved Precious even more for her kind heart. Over the next few weeks, Jidenna's parents tried to set him up with other women. But Jidenna refused to see anyone except Precious. One day, Jidenna surprised Precious at her fruit stand. He got down on one knee and pulled out a ring. "Precious, I love you more than anything. Will you marry me?" he asked. Tears of joy filled Precious's eyes. "Yes, Jidenna. I will." People at the market clapped and cheered. Precious and Jidenna hugged, their love stronger than ever. After Jidenna proposed to Precious, they faced many problems from their families. Jidenna's parents were still unhappy. His mother, Mrs. Andrew, said, "Son, you can't marry a fruit seller. What will our friends say?" Mr. Andrew added, "We won't support this marriage. You'll lose your inheritance if you go through with it." Meanwhile, Precious's stepmother, Tiwa, was furious. She yelled at Precious, "How dare you try to marry a rich doctor? You're just a poor girl who doesn't deserve him." Tiwa even tried to lock Precious in her room to keep her from seeing Jidenna. But Tommy, Precious's stepbrother, stood up for her. One day, when Tiwa was shouting at Precious, Tommy stepped in. "Stop it, mother," Tommy said loudly. "Precious deserves to be happy. Jidenna loves her for who she is." Tommy helped Precious escape when Tiwa locked her up. He gave her his phone to call Jidenna and even helped them meet in secret. "You're like a real sister to me, Precious," Tommy said. "I'll always support you." News of their engagement spread quickly through Lagos. When it reached Mrs. Andrew, Jidenna's mother, she was shocked and upset. She couldn't accept that her son, a respected doctor from a prominent family, wanted to marry a simple fruit seller. "Jidenna, have you lost your mind?" Mrs. Andrew exclaimed when Jidenna told her the news. "What about our family's reputation? What will people say?" Jidenna tried to explain. "Mother, Precious is kind, intelligent, and hardworking. She makes me happy. Isn't that what matters?" But Mrs. Andrew wouldn't listen. She had always imagined her son marrying someone from their social circle, someone who could enhance their family's status. A fruit seller was simply unacceptable in her eyes. Determined to change her son's mind, Mrs. Andrew came up with a plan. She reached out to Amaka, the daughter of a famous politician. Amaka and Jidenna had dated briefly in university, and Mrs. Andrew had always hoped they would end up together. "Amaka, dear," Mrs. Andrew said over the phone, her voice dripping with sweetness, "Jidenna is making a terrible mistake. He needs someone like you to show him what he's missing. Can you help us?" Amaka, who had always regretted letting Jidenna go, eagerly agreed. She started showing up at the Andrew family house frequently, always beautifully dressed in the latest designer fashions. She would talk about exclusive parties, charity galas, and important people she knew, trying to remind Jidenna of the world he belonged to. Mrs. Andrew would seize every opportunity to praise Amaka. "Oh Jidenna, remember when you and Amaka went to that governor's ball? You looked so good together. And Amaka, dear, I heard your father might run for president next year. How exciting." But despite his mother's efforts, Jidenna's heart remained with Precious. Every time Amaka visited, flaunting her wealth and connections, Jidenna found himself thinking about Precious's kind smile, her gentle heart, and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams of opening a very big boutique. "Mom," Jidenna said firmly one evening after Amaka had left, "I know you mean well, but I love Precious. She's the one for me. Please try to understand and accept her." Mrs. Andrew pursed her lips, clearly unhappy. "We'll see about that," she muttered under her breath. One rainy night, after a long and complicated surgery, Jidenna was driving home. The streets of Lagos were slick with rain, and visibility was poor. As he drove through some bad roads tired and sleepy from the day's work, he briefly fell asleep. Suddenly, a large truck in front of him lost control in the wet road. The truck began to move across the lanes. When he woke up it was too late. There was a big crash, the sound of metal crushing and glass shattering. Jidenna felt a sharp pain, and then everything went black. When Jidenna regained consciousness, he found himself in a hospital bed. His whole body ached, and he felt strangely disconnected from his lower half. Dr. Ben, his colleague and friend, was standing next to him with a grave expression. "Jidenna," Dr. Ben said slowly, his voice heavy with emotion, "I'm so sorry. The accident, it caused severe damage to your spine. You can't feel or move your legs. You'll need to use a wheelchair, at least for now." The words hit Jidenna like a physical blow. He felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. How could this be happening? How could he be a surgeon now? What about his plans with Precious? Would she still want to be with him? Those were the questions he had in his mind, each one more painful than the last. Many came to visit him in the hospital, offering words of sympathy and support. Among them was Amaka. When Amaka entered Jidenna's hospital room, "Oh, Jidenna," Amaka said, her voice strained, "this is just terrible. I don't know what to say." Jidenna tried to smile, to make her feel more comfortable. She smiled back, assuring him that everything will be fine. After chatting with him for some minutes, Amaka excused herself that she needed to use the restroom, but instead she went to see the doctors to find out Jidenna's health condition. She was told his spine was affected, but he needed all the love and patience to push through. Amaka returned to the room heartbroken. I need to be honest with you. I can't do this. I can't be with someone in a wheelchair. What would people say? My father's political career. I'm sorry, but this is goodbye." Before Jidenna could respond, Amaka turned and hurried out of the room, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her expensive perfume. Jidenna felt a sharp pain in his chest that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. He had known Amaka wasn't the one for him, but her rejection still hurt. However, as the initial shock faded, Jidenna realized something important. Amaka had never truly loved him. She only cared about his status and what others thought. When Precious heard about the accident, she was at her fruit stand, arranging a display of colorful oranges. The news hit her like a physical blow, and without a second thought, she left everything and ran to the hospital, her heart pounding with worry. She found Jidenna's room and paused at the door, taking a deep breath to compose herself. When she entered, she saw him lying there, looking sad and broken. Precious felt tears gathering up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She knew she needed to be strong for Jidenna. "Jidenna," she said softly, approaching his bed and taking his hand. "I'm here. We'll face this together, no matter what." This brought relief and love to Jidenna's face. Mr. and Mrs. Andrew always come to visit their son. They were there for him. They also apologized for forcing Amaka on him, as she proved to be a woman that lacks the values of a good woman. Meanwhile, Precious came to the hospital every day. She brought Jidenna his favorite fruits, carefully peeled and cut so he could eat them easily. She told him funny stories about her customers at the fruit stand, making him laugh despite his pain. She learned from the nurses how to help turn him in bed to prevent bed sores, and how to massage his legs to improve circulation. This made the parents come to like her because of how she cared for their son. One day, As Precious was helping Jidenna with his exercises, he looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Precious," he said, his voice cracking, "you don't have to do this. Your life will be so hard if you stay with me. I can't walk, I might not be able to work as a surgeon again. You deserve better than this." Precious felt her heart breaking at his words. She gently held his face in her hands, making sure he was looking directly into her eyes. "Jidenna, listen to me," she said firmly. "I love you. Not your legs, not your job as a surgeon. I love you. Your kind heart, your brilliant mind, your loving soul. None of that has changed because of this accident. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, always remember that." Jidenna couldn't hold back his tears any longer. He pulled Precious close, hugging her tightly. "I love you so much," he whispered. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." Precious smiled through her own tears. "You love me for who I am," she said simply. "Now it's my turn to do the same for you." After Jidenna was discharged from the hospital, the real work began. Every day was a challenge, filled with painful therapy sessions and the frustration of learning to navigate the world in a wheelchair. But through it all, Precious was by his side, encouraging him, supporting him, and loving him unconditionally. They turned their living room into a therapy center. Precious learned exercises from the physical therapist and worked with Jidenna every day. She massaged his legs to improve circulation, helped him with stretching exercises, and encouraged him to push his limits a little more each day. Some days were harder than others. There were times when Jidenna felt overwhelmed, convinced that he would never walk again. "It's no use," he would say, his voice filled with frustration and pain. "I'll never be the same again. Maybe we should just give up." But Precious never lost hope. She would take his hands in hers, look into his eyes, and say, "Jidenna, remember who you are. You're the man who performed a 12-hour surgery to save a child's life. You're the man who proposed to me in a fruit stand because that's where we met. You're the man I fell in love with because of your determination and your heart. The Jidenna I know never gives up. So, let's try one more time, okay?" Her words always seemed to bring the spark in Jidenna's eyes. He would nod, take a deep breath, and try again. Slowly, things started to change. Jidenna regained some feeling in his toes. Then, he could wiggle them slightly. Each small victory was celebrated like a major triumph. One day, during a therapy session, something amazing happened. Jidenna was holding onto the parallel bars, trying to stand as he had done many times before. But this time, with Precious cheering him on, he managed to take a small, shaky step. Then another. Precious's eyes filled with happy tears. "You did it, Jidenna," she cried, hugging him carefully. "I knew you could do it." It took many more months of hard work, determination, and Precious's unwavering support, but finally, Jidenna could walk again with the help of a cane. The doctors were amazed, calling it a medical miracle. But Jidenna knew the real miracle was the love and support of the wonderful woman by his side. Throughout Jidenna's recovery, Mrs. Andrew had been watching from a distance. She saw how Amaka had left when things got difficult, exposing her true colors. And she saw how Precious stayed, day after day, helping Jidenna through the toughest time of his life. She watched as Precious put her own life on hold, spending every spare moment helping Jidenna with his recovery. She saw the love and devotion in Precious's eyes, and the way Jidenna looked at her with complete adoration and trust. Slowly, Mrs. Andrew's heart began to soften. She realized that she had been wrong about Precious. This young woman, whom she had dismissed as a simple fruit seller, had shown more strength, love, and character than anyone Mrs. Andrew had ever known. One day, Mrs. Andrew decided it was time to make things right. She went to Jidenna's house, where she found Precious helping Jidenna with his exercises. As she watched them together, Mrs. Andrew felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Precious," she said softly, her voice choked with emotion. "I was so wrong about you. You've shown what true love really means. Can you ever forgive me for how I treated you?" Precious was surprised by Mrs. Andrew's words, but her kind heart immediately responded with forgiveness. She smiled and hugged Mrs. Andrew. "Of course," she said warmly. "We're family now." Mr. Andrew, who had been quietly supportive throughout the ordeal, stepped forward. "Precious," he said, his voice filled with genuine affection, "we would be honored to have you as our daughter-in-law." That is, if you'll still have our son." A shy and excited Precious was so happy as the family embraced, celebrating this moment of joy and new beginnings. They all reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Jidenna returned to his work as a surgeon, now with a deeper empathy for his patients and their struggles. He was grateful for a second chance at life and the presence of a wonderful woman. Precious, now living in Jidenna's beautiful mansion, felt grateful for her good fortune. One day, Precious drove to her old house. Her stepmom, Lola, and Toby looked surprised to see her. After exchanging greetings, Precious kindly informed her stepmother that she would like to offer Tommy a chance to live with her. Tommy excitedly agreed. As they were about to leave, Tiwa suddenly spoke up, her voice shaking. "Precious, wait," she said. We need to apologize. We treated you badly, and we're truly sorry." Toby and Lola nodded, looking ashamed. "We were jealous and unkind. Can you ever forgive us?" Toby asked. Precious was surprised but touched. "Of course I forgive you," she said softly. "We're family, after all." Moved by their apology, Precious made an offer. "I'd like to help you all. I can provide money for you to start a business, Mama. And I'll pay for Toby and Lola's school fees." The family was overwhelmed by Precious's generosity. Tiwa hugged her, tears in her eyes. "Thank you. We don't deserve your kindness." Months passed. Precious's boutique thrived, and she helped Tiwa open a small bakery. Toby and Lola excelled in their studies. They were grateful for the opportunity. Precious's father, who had been away on business, returned to find his family transformed. He was overjoyed to see them all getting along, often gathering for dinners at the mansion. "I'm so proud of you, Precious," her father said one evening. And he also thanked Jidenna for loving and supporting his family. "You've not only found success but brought our family together. Your kindness has changed everything." Precious smiled, looking around at her family and her fiancé. Tommy was laughing with Lola and Toby, while Tiwa and her husband chatted happily. The mansion, once just a symbol of wealth, now felt truly like a home filled with love and unity. After months of loving and appreciating themselves, they knew it was the right time for them to settle down. Both families came together to plan a grand wedding for their children. As they stood together on their wedding day, surrounded by family and friends, in the biggest event center in Lagos, Jidenna and Precious shared their wedding vows and a beautiful kiss. They knew that their love story was just beginning. They had weathered the storm together, and now they were ready to build a beautiful life, full of love, compassion, and hope for the future. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that love, in its purest form, is the most powerful force in the world. It can break down barriers, overcome challenges, and transform lives in ways.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification button for more entertaining stories. Share this video and keep the conversations coming. Please like, comment, and share your opinions on the comments section. Keep enjoying our stories with your friends and families. We love you.